The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello. Yeah, we'll be getting started in about 5 minutes. Thank you for joining.
And hi, Stephen. I see you've joined us. This is Sarah from IPHI. We're just admitting folks in. People are signing in, but feel free if you want to just test out your sound. We are here to help you with that before we kick off.
Yes, hi, this is Steve Letsky with Illinois Department of Transportation.
Hi, Steve. We hear you loud and clear, so you're all set on your sound. Hi, everyone. It's Sarah from the Illinois Public Health Institute. Welcome to the third ITEP webinar. I see we have lots of people signing on, so we just wanted to welcome you and let you know we'll be getting kicked off at our starting time in just a couple minutes.
All right, welcome everyone. This is Maggie Sherwinski from the Active Transportation Alliance, and we'll go ahead and get started. So thanks for joining us today. This is our third and final webinar of our three-part webinar series to help you develop a successful ITEP proposal for walking, biking, and trail projects. And we hope your ITEP applications are underway and they're coming along. Today we'll be spending a little bit of time in the beginning of this webinar to review how to successfully implement an ITEP project if you were awarded funding, and we'll go through how do you navigate what comes next. And we hope many of you are find yourself in that position. But for the majority of this webinar, we'll be opening up the webinar for questions you may have about the ITEP application process. We have representatives from IDA on the line and available to help answer whatever comes up. So please add your questions to the chat box, throughout the presentation, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. So just a few housekeeping items. We are recording the webinar, and all of you as participants are muted, but again, ask any question you may have through the chat box. And just to introduce who we are, so we're the Active Transportation Alliance. We're a nonprofit based in Chicago. We advocate for walking, biking, and public transit to create healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities. So I'm Maggie Sherwinski, an advocacy manager from Active Trans, and Melody Geraci is our Deputy Executive Director, who I'm going to pass the mic over to now.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to virtually be with you. So we're going to refresh a couple of items before we get into the new material. So this will be a repeat for some of you. But what we definitely want to remind everyone that this webinar and this education effort is being supported by a grant from ultimately the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And the program is called ISPAN, Illinois State Physical Activity and Nutrition Program. And the program is being administered through the Illinois Public Health Institute. And so it's interesting, right, that we are making a connection between a transportation funding program and public health, but there is a clear line between the two. In terms of healthy living, physical activity, and people being able to access the things that they need in life. So ISPAN is a 5-year initiative. We're in about year 2.5. We're coming up, just started year 3. The focus for this program is to improve people's public health in 4 areas: breastfeeding, early childhood education, on physical activity and nutrition, the built environment, which is the area that we are under, and food service guidelines. And Active Trans is serving as the built environment technical assistance provider. And so this is one of the activities that we're pursuing in order to help communities connect activity-friendly routes to everyday destinations. That's the whole goal, is to be able to give people the option and the ability to do everything they need to do without needing to jump in the car. Okay, next slide, Maggie. So the first webinar that we presented was back in July, and we went over just some of the general characteristics of the ITEP program, who was eligible, what you needed in order to begin to apply, because at that point the call for projects was not yet open. Part 2 we did the end of August, and we went deep on the actual application itself, the criteria for scoring. There's a new community mapping tool for those of you who haven't been present on the other webinars. And we went through a painstaking look at every element and every section of the application. So if you are new and haven't been on any of the other webinars and you have questions about those areas, and you're kind of getting your proposal together maybe a little later than you would have hoped, I strongly encourage you to check that out. And then of course today is our third webinar. All the materials, including exhaustive Q&A, questions and answers that came as the result of the last two webinars, are posted on ActiveTrans's ITEP webpage with the link there below. So today our agenda, again, as Maggie mentioned, is going to be relatively light so that we preserve enough time for all those last minute questions that you might have, and so that we can answer them in real time as much as possible. So there's not a lapse between what you need to know and the answer that you need, or trying to tag each other back and forth to get answers to your questions. So we're going to focus on those details of submitting the proposal, actually getting it in to IDOT on time. Then we're going to talk a little bit about, if you are a successful grantee and you are awarded funding, what you can expect on the other side of the award announcements that are expected in spring of 2021. And then we'll do our Q&A. So as a refresher, ITEP is the Transportation Enhancement Program for the state of Illinois. It's administered by the Illinois Department of Transportation. It is ultimately federal funding that is authorized by the Federal Surface Transportation Bill. It's a very important source of unique funding for walking, biking, and trail projects. Sometimes it can be difficult to either integrate walking and biking elements into other transportation projects, or you're in a community that wants to find unique funding just for those things. And this is a really, really important one. So we want to make sure that we are giving everybody the information that they need to be successful, as well as spend down a big chunk of new funding that is being transmitted into the program from the relatively newly passed capital bill in Illinois. So there's a lot of money available, $105 million, with both the federal funding and the state funding put together. The program is reimbursable, so you have to have the working capital available to outlay the cash to pay for the elements up front, unless you are going through a state letting process for construction. And the due date is November 2nd, so we're about 2 weeks away. Quick, we're not going to go through this, but this is the same glossary that we've been publishing with every webinar. So if there are acronyms, Alphabet City, that you don't understand, you can look here. Okay, in terms of submitting your proposal, these are the most important points that you have to do. You have to submit both an online application and a hard copy application. The online application obviously happens in real time automatically. The hard copy application must be received by Monday, November the 2nd at 4:30 p.m. Central in the IDOT Springfield office, okay? So that means the mail, we personally do not recommend putting it in the mail. Sending it either overnight or express mail by in some fashion, or messengered. You can also drop it off in person at the IDOT Springfield office only. You cannot drop it off at your local district office, but there will be a mechanism there for you to drop it off at the front in the reception area at the front desk. And then one other piece, go back just a second, Maggie. The hard copy has to be unbound, one unbound copy. So that can mean you can do a hole punch and put it into a 3-ring binder where the pages are independently able to be brought out and looked at separately. No staples, no other kinds of bindings. And when you submit your online copy, the system will generate a 6-digit number for your specific application. That number must be transferred onto the hard copy. So it won't automatically if you're printing out the online version to send in, that number will not appear until after it's already submitted. So make sure that that six-digit number gets onto your hard copy.
Melody, I wanted to mention one other thing because some applicants have been emailing us about this, about signatures. So on the online application, you can use electronic signatures, but on that hard copy, you need a real signature, the one that you send to IDOT.
Excellent point. Yeah, we have gotten a couple of questions about that. So a wet signature on the hard copy is required. And just a reminder to, go over that checklist of related documents that need to be attached to your application. Go through it a couple times just to make sure you don't forget anything. The 4 different GATA form pieces, including, and then additionally, the detailed cost estimate, the local assurance page, the government resolution, and the community map. These are all extra pieces that you need to make sure are with your hard copy.
All right, so I'm going to take over here about next steps. So what happens after you submit your proposal on November 2nd? So as Melody mentioned, expect for awards to be announced for ITEP in the spring of 2021. Notification letters will be sent by U.S. postal mail with the it will include the amount you were awarded with information about deadlines based on the phases of work you were approved for. And then the awards will also be announced on IDOT's website, and there will be a press release. So spring of 2021. If you do receive funding, if you receive that notice, the next step is to contact your local roads enhancement coordinator. So they're responsible for project implementation, and they will be your main point of contact going forward once you've received that letter. So you're going to want to schedule a kickoff meeting as soon as possible. So you want to get that moving. It needs to be scheduled. That kickoff meeting needs to be scheduled within 6 weeks of receiving the notification of your award. And then at that time, you'll also want to get started on getting the proper agreements and paperwork in place before any project work can begin. So we wanted to emphasize this part because we've heard stories of this can go wrong because you don't want to get started again before you get agreements in place. So each phase of your project will require a local agency agreement, and that needs to be in place before any work can begin. You'll need to get a joint funding agreement in place, and then you'll need to get an engineering agreement in place if you're using an engineering consultant. And all of these details about the agreements, your local roads enhancement coordinator will help you through this, but the information is also available in the in IDOT's Bureau of Local Roads and Streets Manual in Chapter 5. So processing for the agreements typically takes several months, so that's why you want to get started on this right away. Once all agreements are approved and executed, then IDOT submits that information to the Federal Highway Administration, the FHWA, for federal funding authorization. And then IDOT will notify you, the local sponsor, when work can actually begin. So just be aware that reimbursements will not be allowed for work that started before you get that federal authorization and before you get IDOT's notice to proceed. So we just wanted to flag that, that as an important thing to remember. So, you know, we have just a few slides we wanted to go through of questions that might come up for you along the way if you're awarded funding, and these are just things to keep in mind, and how you navigate different situations that might arise. So one question that has been asked is, what if I don't get all the funds I requested? So in most cases, IDOT does award the full amount of funding that's requested in your ITEP application, up to $2 million, the maximum amount of the ITEP award. And reasons why this may not be the case if you don't receive full funding, it could be that your application was exceeding that $2 million cap, or there might be some ineligible items that were in your application that cannot be funded. So while it doesn't happen often, if you don't receive all the funds you requested on eligible items, there are a couple options that you have. You can, one, look for funding from other public or private sources. So once you have some initial funding, so you will have some ITEP funding, that often helps bring in additional funding. So seeking additional sources could be an option. And then second, you could look at reducing the project scope to fit within the funding that was provided. And if you need to go that route, you'll need to schedule a scoping meeting with IDOT to determine how to proceed with the rescoping. So another question is, what happens if things get more expensive than you had planned on? So if you come across a large cost increase or there's some unforeseen item that comes up, what do you do? IDOT is limited on the amount of ITEP funding that is available. So here are some things to try first. It's seeking alternatives. So what we mentioned on the previous slide is, one, look for additional funding sources. Two, you could look to see if you have any unused phase 1 or phase 2 engineering funding and move that to construction. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. And then 3, you could look at reducing your project scope again to perhaps stop at a logical termini and reapply for ITEP funds in the next cycle for the remaining portion of your project. So there are several different options you could take. As a last resort, you could request additional ITEP funding from IDOT. And this is just what you would do if you had to go that route. So you would start with writing a letter to your ITEP coordinator to explain why you're making the request, and then you'll need to provide a lot of documentation, which would include revised cost estimates, maps, photos, a new schedule for the project. And then one note here, if your project already received the max $2 million in funds, then getting additional funds is not possible in that case. But then your request would be reviewed by IDOT, and it would be on a case-by-case basis. So what I was just alluding to earlier is, can you move funds between phases? So say, for example, your project was approved for both engineering funding and construction funding. If you received, say, other funds from engineering after the award, or if you had any unused engineering costs, you could move those funds into construction. And then just one thing to note is the overall award amount would remain the same, but you can shift those funds between phases. And if you needed to do this, you would again work with your ITEP coordinator. That's kind of the key to all of these questions. Work with them, and you'll need to submit a letter to get that process started. And then what if you're unable to meet the time frame for implementing your project? So the key here is making sure you're communicating regularly with IDOT. You'll need to provide early notice on any issues you're having that you think might affect your timeline. Again, report that to your local IDOT district office as soon as you can. If you go past any deadlines, original deadlines that are in your contract, you'll be required to get an approved time extension to continue using funds on the project. And without getting a time extension, your project funds could be rescinded. So again, just make sure to reach out to IDOT as soon as you can, provide justification for what's causing the delay. You'll need to provide details about any external factors that are impacting your timeline, and show that you're taking steps to mitigate the risks that caused the delays in the first place, and just provide updates on your project timeline, on your costs. So you'll likely need to submit documentation on the status of your project then on a periodic basis, but just something to keep in mind. So Melody, I think I'm turning it over to you now to discuss some of the required reporting.
Yes, and we are getting some really good questions, and I see that Missy is actually starting to answer a few of them in the chat box. So keep them coming. I'm making a list as we go, and we'll start answering them very shortly. So the reporting that's required is a quarterly reporting. It's a form called the Bob's form, and it's pretty self-explanatory. So if you get to that point, you know, if you're awarded funding, I am confident that IDOT will walk you through, your IDOT representative will walk you through the requirements and how to fill that out. Then annually, there's also a CIFR, a consolidated year-end financial review. So that's just encapsulating all of the expenses, all of the spending that you've done. And then occasionally you might be asked by IDOT for some more specific, in-depth reporting, specifically, and most importantly, if you have like a change to your project, some sort of an amendment or a time extension or a cost increase, there will be some additional reporting that might be required. Go ahead, Maggie. And then again, just some general tips. You know, this is funding that comes from two different entities. It's complicated. There are lots of federal aid requirements and a significant process there. So there are, it does take time, you know, as with anything publicly funded, it does take some time. So build that into your considerations. I have made this mistake myself personally and been very anxious to get a program or a project off the ground and got jump started and got all my ducks in a row within like a week, and then had to walk everything back a little bit because the process just does not move that quickly. Also, this also relates to not just the process, but right-of-way acquisition. Railroads and utility companies, you know, are on their own timeline and will respond and coordinate with you as it's, you know, convenient for them as well. So that sometimes it slows things down. Same thing goes with other stakeholders and agencies. And then other considerations for that might, you know, disrupt your timeline a little bit. Design variance approvals. So if you're looking to do some sort of innovative design or facility that is not included in the standard IDOT manuals, you might need some time to go through that process. Obviously, environmental always takes a little bit of time. Public involvement, if that is part of your work going forward, you'll need to allow for that. IDOT reviews and approvals, again, that's again part of the process, and that can take a little bit of time. And then if there's an RFQ, there's a letting for construction, particularly, or a letting for, you know, construction projects, whether IDOT's doing it or you're doing it as local letting, that's going to take some time as well. So if you have a good consultant, they will, and they're very experienced in this, or if your city staff is experienced in this, they will know kind of the little hang-ups here and there. And we tried to address a few of those last webinar with Joel, our engineering friend from Civil Tech, who has been around this a number of times. But I think that, you know, just asking questions is the best remedy to any hang up that might occur. And then if you are curious as to why your application failed, right? Or didn't fail, but didn't receive funding this time around. It's not really fair to say failed. Sometimes the funds just run out, and the application scoring is stacked very closely together. So all the ITEP scores will be published online, not just those that receive funding, but also those that do not. So you'll be able to see your score relative to other funded projects. If you'd like some specific feedback, you can always try and contact the central office at ITEP, and they'll, you know, accommodate you as they can. And also remember that, and we've tried to make this point a number of times, that this application, if this is the first time you've written an application for a specific project that you're trying to get funded, it's your template, right? It's your template for a bunch of other public funding opportunities that are out there. You just need to, you know, tweak based on the funding criteria. So say if this project, for example, is within 2 miles of a school, and could be, you can argue that the project would link students to the ability to walk or bike to school. It could be a good fit for Safe Routes to School funding that comes through IDOT. The Surface Transportation Program, which most of your councils of government or MPOs and RPCs know about and facilitate that funding. STP is a really good opportunity. Nothing says that is only for resurfacing, for example. If you live in District 1 or District 8, there's always congestion mitigation and air quality funds, Highway Safety Improvement Program, which is, the last I heard, was fairly underutilized. So if your project is looking to alleviate a significant crash problem, right? If you have really, you know, you've had 10 pedestrian crashes in the last 5 years at this location, you could look into the HSIP program. Might be a good fit. Illinois Department of Natural Resources has a couple of programs, the Recreational Trails Program, obviously, for anything that's trail related, and then the Bicycle Path Grant Program, which includes more, is more around all types of bike paths. And then community development block grants, if you live in a community that is under-resourced, CDBG also allows for some pedestrian and bicycle improvements around specific sites for people to be able to access that site that you're trying to improve.